Welcome back to Build Boldly Podcast. I'm your host, Pat Rodgers, and somehow we have made it an entire year on Build Boldly. Feels like yesterday we started this out. I am joined today by Allison Barber, who you have heard on a few episodes here as well. And today we're going to give you a recap. We're gonna walk through the year, what we learned, what we found out, why we're doing this whole thing, and see where it goes. How's that sound, Allison?
That sounds great. Thanks for having me on. It's been such a fun year. Thank you for getting in on all the shenanigans that I have planned as the marketing department and just leading the podcast with excellence. It's been so fun.
Well, we cannot do it without you by any stretch. So the feeling is mutual, which is a
Thank
good
you.
segue into why we started this whole thing. And I'd say from my seat, we have so many small businesses, scaling businesses, corporations that are operating out of all of our sites. And you see these podcasts out there that are talking about the Instagrams of the worlds and these massive blow up, huge successes, but there are everyday Main Street businesses that are incredibly powerful, doing incredible work, and out there every day grinding it to make their family successful, to leave a legacy. And we wanted to tell those stories. And I think we also wanted to give those that are thinking about starting a business, that are thinking about how to scale their business, what that next step might be, some insight into what it actually looks like, what it actually takes, and where we're heading. And so hopefully we accomplished that. I think we learned a lot throughout that. But ultimately, that's where we want to go, and I think we were able to get some of those. I don't know. How do you feel about what we did in the last year?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So part of what inspired our team to start a podcast was in the marketing department, I would call our customers as they were coming on and just ask them, how is your space? What do you like about Rise? What made you choose Rise? Tell me about your business. And to your point, I heard so many amazing stories about so many awesome entrepreneurs. And I also heard how when they came into our space, it was like a game changer. It unlocked something for them. And I couldn't help but keep going back to like, we have to share this. We have to help other entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurship is such a lonely venture. There's no coworkers, there's nobody like patting your back, saying you're doing a great job, giving you a bonus or a raise or anything like that. It's all on your own shoulders. And so I think hearing those customer stories and realizing, podcasting is such a cool way to kind of get a behind the scenes peek into what's going on. So that was kind of where it all came together. And I think to your point, it's been such a fun time just like sharing those stories and, what does that look like and kind of behind the scenes and all of that. It's been super fun.
Absolutely. And I think to your point, like I would get these little tidbits from you or one of our district managers of a business growing, expanding inside of Rise. And the thing that I think caught us both off guard was just the gratefulness. Like we're just providing space. You are doing all of the
Yes,
work. The roses go to you, but you're giving us these kudos. And it's like it's time for us to share those stories and hopefully be that pat on the back that a lot of entrepreneurs don't get when they're in these, early days and even, the lumps along the way, which the last year, the last couple years have had their ups and downs. And so for all
of
these folks to
course.
come out and still share this with us and be out there fighting the good fight, I think the least we can do is get those stories out there and hopefully share some insights and thoughts that get you thinking, help you give that first step that folks need to really get things moving, and hopefully we'll continue to do that over the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is surprising to hear like how much gratitude comes from the space that they have. I think it's also just surprising the opportunities that it unlocks for our customers. But speaking of surprising things, like what were some of the most surprising moments I feel like during this 2025 of our recording?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, there are so many stories, obviously, that come up that are just like, wow, that's impressive. Everything from I had no idea the breadth of what 3D modeling can do. And, from actually creating a end finished good to, hey, I lost a screw on this old thing. Oh yeah, we'll just send that new screw over. And you just think about what we've learned and what these innovative individuals with a small idea that turns into a full business, all the way to uh, the guys at Albatross that lost their jobs during COVID, hurting badly, decide, you know what, we're going to do whatever it takes to get this thing up and running, are vulnerable enough to go out and ask for help, which every early entrepreneur is like, well, I got to make it on my own. I got to figure this out. And
Yes.
seeing that, vulnerability, not only to share that with me, but to have the courage and put their pride aside to say, I need this help, all the way to Legacy Fire operating their third place, right? This is an operating business that has revenue, starting in a new market. We're going to run it out of an apartment, right? Like all of these things that you're like, the grassroots efforts, I think, are always exciting, inspiring, and surprising whenever we hear them. And then you've got the lumps of actually just doing this podcast and, and trying to nail it down, which you have a ton of the behind the scenes challenges, I'd say, opportunities. We'll call them opportunities
Yes.
that have come through. And so I know you've got some good insight on just that side of how do you get a podcast started?
Yeah. So I was so shocked to kind of figure out what does the actual process look like of bringing a podcast into the world. We have these great entrepreneurs with great stories, and our team is wonderful. The team at Palm Tree Podco has been wonderful to work with, but the actual logistics of nailing down an entrepreneur, nailing down our team that moves at the speed of light, and just things come up. So we would have something scheduled out, we'd have something planned, and then we'd pivot, or somebody's kid would get sick, or a snowstorm would happen. Or so I think if you're looking to start a podcast, or thinking about a podcast, know that it's not going to be linear. Just like business is not linear. Things come up, you have to reschedule. It's not because they don't want to be on your show or you don't want to have them on the show. It's just like life in general happens. So that was a big learning curve for me. A few of the other things I think is just the work that it takes to promote the podcast. From our end, we have a huge audience. We have 15 locations, and we have entrepreneurs at every one of those locations and their families, and we already have an audience. And the work that it takes to be able to say, like, okay, we got to let people know about this podcast. We got to figure out where we're going to promote it, how we're going to promote it. It can be a heavy lift. It's a rewarding lift, of course. It's worth it that we're still doing the podcast. But I think sometimes it's easy to think I'm just gonna get behind this mic and this podcast is just gonna go viral. And so it was reassuring along the way for me to hear, like, most podcasts don't make it to 10 episodes, or it's just most people start a podcast and it just doesn't end up taking off. So yeah, there was a lot of behind the scenes surprises, I think, on just the production side of things.
Yeah. Technical issues aside, which every single business deals with, whether that's your Google Meet not working for one another, or your internet going out, or just 10 minutes ago our echoing that we
Yes.
couldn't figure out in this very podcast with the two people that run this podcast trying to figure that out. You're going to have
Yes.
all these lumps, you're going to have these bumps, but it's a similar vein, I think, to what we hear. And one of our big lessons, right, is just do it. Just get out there and do it and keep doing it. And that's something that will take off. And I was thinking about this. Another great memory was we had Shoe Doctor Zach on, and he is now a YouTube sensation with testing shoes. And he came into one of our facilities to be able to demo shoes and run all this. And he's like, the first year was miserable. The second year was miserable, but you just kept going and you just kept going, and eventually you get there. And I think, we use that both as how did your e-commerce business take off, let alone your social business that, quote unquote took off after years of effort. And so that was another good highlight that I think as we were getting into this, it's like, okay, we've got some work to do. We've got time and input and things that we'll just keep having to tweak and improve, but learn as we go and don't stop because that's the worst thing you can do.
Yeah, I don't know how many times Anthony and Emily at Palm Tree Podco reminded us, like, podcasting is a slow growth. Like,
Yep.
just give yourself some grace, and I appreciated that support from them as well. But so we had the surprises on the episodes themselves. What about surprises with how the episodes were received? What episodes were the most popular? What would you say surprised you about how the show was received?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think, the interesting part was depending on the guest and their reach, obviously, that changed the dynamics of how well certain shows were received or downloaded if you're looking at the data. I think the other part for us that's interesting is, like, we can take pieces of this podcast and highlight those individual business owners and see the impact and engagement on shorter clips of social where somebody might not actually dive into the entire episode, but they hear those insights, they hear those lessons, and we see that engagement as a wholly separate component of what we're doing because it's not going to show up in the downloads and the followers and things like that. But you see that engagement. So I think that's one thing that was really interesting. The other that I can say this wholeheartedly that I said, guys, I don't know if this is going to work. Why would anyone want to hear me just talk about a topic? Surprisingly, to my chagrin, works pretty well. And I think that is, hopefully because we are sharing insights that folks are looking for, things that you can't find anywhere else and or you need in a consumable manner. And I think that's kind of one of our goals is to make sure that if there are knowledge points, if there's things that we can do to help you identify your next step, think about how to get started, whatever it might be. If we're sharing those, that has an interest. And so that probably was my and you know this, I was like, I don't know. And somehow that worked out. So
Yeah,
maybe we'll
no,
see more
I
of that.
I love that. I love that you brought that point up. Because for me, as I'm thinking through, okay, what do we talk about? How do we share the information? We kept coming back to people wanting to know more details about leasing. Um, like, you can hear successful entrepreneurship stories, to your point, they may not be small businesses or growing businesses that are just starting. It may be Instagram or Spanx or whatever the brand is that's just taken off, and you hear these huge entrepreneurs. But you can kind of hear that entrepreneur story in multiple different locations. And so about probably a third to a halfway through the year, I was just like, "Man, this is feeling like it's getting stale." We had this conversation.
Yep.
I'm like, "Every tenant story is so cool, but it feels like I'm listening to the same thing again." And I did not want the podcast to get stale. And so we started talking about internally kind of like, what are some of the other things that people are constantly asking about or wanting to know about that is not already available in the market? And I think, to your point, that's why the leasing series took off so well, because it was like, okay, nobody's talking about the fact that most commercial leases are 5 to 10 years, or you have these outrageous cam fees, and or you have an electricity bill and this and like, yeah, your rent is this much, but these are all the other things you have to keep in mind. Nobody's telling people that, especially in the context of I'm really only needing 500, 1,000 square feet. I'm not looking for 100,000 square feet yet. Maybe
Yep.
someday. But I think we really kind of narrowed in on that gap in the market that we talk about a lot internally, and it paid off. I think the other thing that was surprising on my end, which I should have known this, I knew it in my heart, but so most of our audience is male. And a lot of men consume podcasts on YouTube. And so, about a half to three quarters of the way through the year, we expanded the show from just being an audio show to also being a video show. And the whole time we've been posting reels on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. But we decided to expand the show to YouTube as that's where podcasting was heading. And we have been surprised at how well the show has taken off on YouTube. We shouldn't have been surprised because I know even just talking with my husband, he listens to all of his podcasts on YouTube. I listen to all of my podcasts on Apple Podcasts. Like, so it doesn't surprise me that most of our audience isn't listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever. But that was a surprising thing on my end because I'm like, let's look at the metrics and we're trying to watch Apple Podcasts and we're trying to watch Spotify and we're doing all of these things. And it's like really the answer was let's get into YouTube.
Yeah. Well, I think that reminds me of one of our other lessons, right? On that kind of, is this getting stale? We wanted this to be organic initially in terms of our conversations and the stories, because our hope was that, felt as genuine to the audience as we wanted it to be. And I think our lesson throughout was, kind of, there is a little bit more preparation that we can be doing prior to the podcast to get into a specific area of that journey that an entrepreneur is going through, or that specific topic that folks are looking for. And I think that was kind of our other, test with the solo episodes was, is a specific topic enough, or are these stories, the important piece? And so I think that was a big lesson for us as we kind of went through this, alongside all of the other things that we've been doing. That kind of gives us some interesting opportunities as we move forward.
Absolutely. So we learned a lot about entrepreneurship. We learned a lot about podcasting. What did we learn about the modern day entrepreneur in 2025?
Yes. Well, number one, I think time and time again, some in between of, if you're thinking about this, jump in. Right? And it's not a jump in, two toes in. This is a jump feet first in. And ultimately the kind of secondary piece of that is bet on yourself, and I think that is the underlying theme of every story that we heard was, if you're going to do it, you got to go all in and bet on yourself and trust yourself to make this thing happen. And so I think that, if there's one thing that, time and time again you hear across the board, that's the underlying theme. I think the other like interesting pieces that came out of some of this was, if we think about, for instance, Legacy Fire, right? So Legacy had operating business in northern Indiana. That territory they did very well. They were looking to expand. Now, most businesses may think, all right, let's open up a building. Let's go wall to wall with press releases and advertising and everything else. And they said, you know what, we're gonna do what we've always done and bootstrap this thing. And they're operating their third location out of an apartment, for a year, and then into the house garage, and then finally space, right? And so there are so many ways to get started. You think about Bra Lamar, we're starting this business in a barracks while on, deployment, and ultimately preparing and setting themselves up for the ultimate outcome of a real business on the other side. And so those two things kind of together are, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, if you have this passion, if you have this desire, start, just get started. And I think those are kind of some of the things that across the board were really telling. I think the other parts that kind of showed through, depending on the level of the business owner and where they were at, is find those partners, find those mentors, find your gaps, and fill those in as soon as you can. And that's, everything from, we talked about Albatross and those guys, like betting on each other, being vulnerable enough to ask for help, and, somebody that they're writing a bid sheet to, an order form, which could easily say, oh, we're going to jack that up. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Sat down and coached them through how to write this out. And that was an unlock for their business and the ability to scale. They continue to do business. So both a kudos to them for having that, but also the partner saying, "Hey, we could grow together. Let me help you get there." And I think that's something that a lot of people, especially fresh entrepreneurs, are fearful of. Is that going to be a blemish on me? Is it going to make me look bad? Am I going to be the one that's now like, oh wow, that person doesn't have it together. There's no way that business is going to survive. You have those concerns, those mental thoughts that you just have to get over and realize that if you're going to make this, if there's something you don't know, you have to go find it out. You have to ask those questions. And then internally, if you don't have those resources, is that a external partner? Is that a marketing agency that you're bringing in to own that for you because that's not your cup of tea? You don't want to sit there and do that all day. Is it an accounting firm that's going to support you because you're great at delivering product or being in the field and you just don't have time for the books? Those things that time and time again kind of came up as find the mentors, find the partners, fill in your gaps. That will lead to success. And in some cases, that's an outlay of capital that you may not be ready for. But if you don't have that expertise, you have to get it done, or it's not going to matter, right? You're not going to get to
Yes.
that moment on the other side. And
Yeah,
I
I
guess the
think
last, oh, go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say before we move on, I think when you were talking about the vulnerability that some of these entrepreneurs show and shared on the show, it reminds me of TJ's with Neat Audio. He was talking about, you know, he reached out to a tenant, like, on Facebook and was just like, reached out to a client, I'm sorry, on
Yeah,
Facebook and was just like, "Hey, I can do this for you." He was working at his, normal job and he was just trying to sell and their show went down in the middle of a show and he was like overnight building out something that he had no idea what to
yeah,
do. That was just such a cool moment for him to share that, I feel like, and be vulnerable to be like, I had no idea what I was doing, but I
absolutely.
jumped in.
Saw the opportunity, bet on it, and just made it happen. And now the business is not only growing at enormous rates, but also selling back to the business he was at when he started this journey, right? And just a full circle moment, for him. And TJ in itself, another great example of kind of the final point is a lot of these businesses. Every time we talked, I should have gotten into bigger space sooner. I should have gotten my own space sooner. And that's not for me to toot our horn. If you're using my space or somebody else's space, does not matter to me. But ultimately, it is this ability to scale and take on the opportunities that you are holding back from, whether that be mental load, because I can tell you from every one of these, when they were operating in their homes, out of their trucks, garage, you name it, it is a tough balancing act between your family time, your work time, and everything else. And when you get into your own space and you have that opportunity to breathe, think, expand, have a separation between home and work, and have that ability to grow and accept those opportunities as they come, that is something that is just tremendous. And we have fireworks going on in the background. So if you are watching this,
I was
somehow that
wondering what
took
was
off,
happening.
which I'm excited about because yes, space is important, and we're gonna need those fireworks. But I think that's kind of the final thing is, bet on yourself, fill in your gaps, and ultimately know when it's time to take that bet again and say, I'm ready to grow. I need my own space to actually scale this business, make us more professional, and ultimately get to that next level.
Yeah, and I think one other thing that we have talked about throughout this whole process is just, like, the clarity that comes when you have that space. You talked a little bit about like the mental load that gets lifted, but when that mental load gets lifted, you also have these clarifying moments. One of those that I talked with Liz James about with Standard Wax is she was, running her business. She was trying to figure everything out. She came to Rise and got in her space, and she was able to, like, kind of get out of the rat race. Once she had the space, once she had some mental clarity, she was able to be like, "Okay, what does this actually mean for my business? Like, what should I actually be doing? Not just what can I be doing, like, what sales can I be making?" But she found really her niche. And I think we hear that over and over again as well with customers that they were able to get a certain supplier partnership because of the amenities that they have at Rise, or they were able to just have some space, like you said, and gain some mental clarity to really unlock the next level of their business as well.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
speaking of
Yes,
clarity, we have some clarity for 2026. Tell us what we're doing in 2026.
we do. So, good news, bad news, you're gonna hear more of me. Um, and part of that is because I think we've learned that clicking down into some of these stories, clicking down into some of these lessons and providing a little bit more color, a little more context on, for example, I am ready to scale. How do I do that? Where do I find capital? What do I do with that? I may be looking at acquiring a business. How would I value that? How do I get myself prepared for that? Sales and marketing, so there's all of these business principles that we have touched on throughout all of these conversations that have allowed us to share these stories. And our goal now is how do we click into that and provide more context, more knowledge, a starting point, some insights you may not be thinking about, and ultimately provide those not only with myself, but with some experts out there that are going to help our audience, the business owners, the next generation, really figure out how to get started and scale. And so that's really one of our key goals is to take some of that we learned from our leasing lessons and principles and apply that into all of these other business arenas that can help folks scale, that can help people get to that next level. And it may not be a one size fits all. Our hope is that we give you enough to get started and then take it from there. And we know that our audience is very able and capable of doing so. So that's our ultimate goal, while still bringing you some of these stories, some of these growth opportunities, but ultimately digging in a little bit deeper. And that's mostly preparation on our side and helping our potential podcast guests see where we're coming from and what fits them best so that we can provide not only those how to's, but also the real life stories that come out of those. And so that's really, I think, some of the key things that we're going to do. You've got the list and the schedule. What do you want to introduce some of the things that will be coming here soon?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I think the interesting thing that I am excited about is some of the guests that you're going to bring on and the kind of behind the scenes conversations that you're going to be able to have for our listeners, for these entrepreneurs. Like they're not going to necessarily be able to sit down with the president of a community bank. But you can, and you're going to, and you're going to be so gracious to share that conversation. So I think what I'm most excited about is maybe just having some opportunities for our listeners to share what they're most interested in hearing about and kind of adding that to the lineup for those specific topics. So, I mean, you did such a great job kind of sharing the roadmap for, just business in general. One of the things that we really pride ourselves here at Rise is that our founder is a multi-successful entrepreneur, and he does a great job of encouraging a space that isn't just space, but it really helps entrepreneurs grow. And so we have tried to really, as a brand, think about, and as a leadership team, sit down and think about what else can we offer that will help these businesses grow, not just space. Like, what are the amenities? What are other things that we can give to these entrepreneurs so that they can feel that support. And so I think that's what 2026 really is. It's like, what is that toolbox that we can just put in their hands to really make 2026 like a really successful year for them?
Absolutely. Well, and we're going to kick off January with some quick hitters of things that you as an entrepreneur can do starting in January to get yourself ready for the rest of the year. And then ultimately, we'll dive into those topics in greater detail throughout the year to provide that context and hopefully give you that next leg up. So, starting in January, we will be releasing our mini series, which will essentially be a roadmap for the rest of the year. And our goal for 26 is that we're providing you with the business roadmap. So, each of these key topics finance and accounting, sales and marketing, strategy and operations, personal leadership development, all of these things that we've had the opportunity to learn. We're going to dive in deeper with the experts and really bring that forward, and ultimately also get a little more tactful with our interviews with our actual entrepreneurs. And so we can take, those ideas, get more gritty with them, and provide those real world scenarios that we hope will help you take your next step. So that's our game plan. We're excited about it. We hope that you are excited about it as well. And that'll be kicking off in January. So a lot more to come. We're excited from our lessons and learnings for the past year, and that this is kind of our new path forward to hopefully help you continue to build boldly.